Today, we'll be looking at the most broken metas throughout the history of Counter-Strike. But instead of talking about it, let me just show you. Now, to make this video easier for you guys to follow, I've decided to separate Counter-Strike into 3 timelines. First, we got old Counter-Strike, which is essentially every CS before CSGO. Then, of course, we have CSGO, and lastly, CS2. Now, in older Counter-Strikes, there were a lot of different metas, but the most notable one has to be the wallbang meta in 1.6. And in case you didn't know, practically every wall was paper thin in this game, which meant that almost any wallbang spot you could think of was most likely possible. This was so broken, but I honestly loved this part of the game. It opened up a whole nother layer of combat, and you could use your natural instincts to shoot players through the wall, which I personally see as pure skill. But to be fair, it was a bit over the top sometimes. Now, moving on to Counter-Strike Source, which with the introduction of object physics created some very unique metas. Initially, this new feature was just used to move objects around to either get some additional cover or to cover the bomb. But where this feature truly excelled at and eventually became a meta was on Office, which had a ton of movable drawers around the entire map. Now, most people would just throw a grenade under them in an attempt to block their opponent's movement, but a few took it to another level by either using lineups to get some very useful cover or to block off entire entranceways. And even though it wasn't really impossible to get through, it definitely made it a lot harder, and there was a slight chance of them getting stuck. Next up, we got my favorite meta by far, which is of course the bhop meta in Counter-Strike Source. And the reason why bunny hopping was a meta in Source and not in 1.6 is because bunny hopping got heavily nerfed in 1.6, but with the release of Counter-Strike Source, the nerf didn't carry over. But at the time, most people still didn't truly understand what this mechanic was capable of. But I feel like the legendary Foon used bunny hopping to its full potential and dominated entire teams. And when this first started to happen, people went insane, which made for some legendary clips.
Go outside, man. You guys are so fucking bad outside.
Yo, you fucking do it, man. The guy bunny hopped to get there before us.
Go flash him. Do me a favor and just go outside and flash it. Oh my god.
Now, even though bunny hopping wasn't as powerful in 1.6, there still were a ton of different movement tricks you could do. For example, a very common trick was double crouching, that was used to jump over small obstacles or to make less noise while running. But a more notable meta was ground strafing. It was essentially just like bunny hopping, but instead of jumping, you would crouch, allowing you to move forward extremely fast. But unlike bunny hopping, you were also able to change directions really quickly, which allowed you to perform some Matrix level plays. Now lastly, before we move on to CSGO, I want to pay attention to the shield and night vision goggles that a lot of people considered completely useless. But I personally remember playing against entire teams that all use riot shields. And if you've ever experienced this, you know this was impossible to play against. And if playing against moving walls wasn't already bad enough, you were also able to use shields while defusing, to camp corners or small areas, and to of course bait out bullets. Also, I think the night vision goggles were actually extremely useful at the time, because most maps featured very poorly lit areas. And a really good tactic I personally remember using on Milita was turning off the lights in the sewers and sneaking through them. Also, not to mention, for a long time you were also able to use night vision goggles to dodge flashes. Essentially, if you had them on and got flashbanged, you could take them off and the flashbang effects would mostly be removed. Now moving on to CSGO, where we have probably the most insane meta I've ever seen used in pro play. And it was pulled off by Shox and Tens in a Titan vs eFrag game in 2015, where they managed to achieve the impossible and buy themselves a MAC-10 on the pistol round. The tactic itself was actually pretty simple. Shox dropped the deagle to Tens, Tens then peeked mid, got a kill, and he was able to buy the MAC-10 with money to spare. And a lot of people did replicate this tactic in competitive games, but this was only achieved once in a professional tournament, and it will never be achieved again, since now even if you did manage to get a kill and run back to spawn in 20 seconds, this error will now pop up. Then of course we have the bhop macro meta, that turned you into a bunny hopping god in the matter of a few minutes. And the craziest part about this was the fact that this wasn't even bannable. And in case you don't believe me, iNotorious made a really great video about this in 2016 that revealed how broken the bhop macro truly was. The video itself instantly starts off with him showing the most perfect bunny hops imaginable. Then he also shows us that this even works while carrying a hostage and even while holding a negev. Yeah, this was ridiculously broken and it worked pretty much until the very end of CSGO, so it's very likely that some of your favorite bhop YouTubers probably used a bhop macro. There was also a really popular meta on Vertigo back when the map was far away from being as polished as it is today. And it surely shows because the #1 meta on this map was this crazy maneuver you could do to jump straight into the T spawn. It was definitely a really risky move, but it had a lot of potential and it definitely paid off sometimes. Also, I vividly remember practicing this simple maneuver for way too long, just to end up getting kicked because I should talk with myself way too many times. Now next, let's not forget the 4x3 stretched meta in CSGO that made your game look absolutely disgusting, but it was used by practically every pro player. Simply because 4x3, and more notably 5x4, made the player models a lot thicker, theoretically making them easier to hit. And also as a bonus you got a lot more FPS, but stretched res wasn't actually only beneficial because it lowered your field of view quite a bit. But I guess it doesn't matter because clearly this hasn't held back any of the pro players. Next up we got the pay to win meta.
Dude, they don't see me! They don't see me!
Which is practically unheard of in Counter-Strike. But that was until they added agent skins to the game. Just see for yourself, this guy is playing overpass and he's trying to push B. See if you can spot the enemy. Yeah, this was insanely stupid, and no joke, when I first saw this, it took me like a solid 3 seconds to see him. And this wasn't the only spot either, there was also this really insane spot on Inferno, where you could literally become one with nature and turn into a flower pot. Now another one of my favorites is the run boost, which has been a part of Counter-Strike since almost the very beginning, with new run boost spots still being discovered to this day. Like this Vertigo spot for an example, that catches any enemy off guard. But this is an extreme example. Run boosting has been used in so many different situations, and the possibilities are truly endless. My personal favorite run boost that I used most often was on Inferno, where I most of the time accidentally managed to jump on my teammate's head and got launched forward, allowing me to get an unexpected peak banana. Moving on though, we have the famous silent jump meta that even I remember using. Basically, how silent jumping worked was by crouching while jumping and then letting go of the crouch key right at the peak of your jump. And besides making your jumps completely silent, it also made your jump a lot lower. And the problem with this was that from your perspective, you were still able to see over walls perfectly, but the opponent was only able to see a few pixels off your head. And now thinking back on it, this was ridiculously broken, and I can't believe this was in the game for like 3 years. And the only reason they even fixed it was because Big abused the hell out of it in the 2017 BGL Major. Now moving on to CS2, which has already experienced a wide variety of different metas. But the most broken out of them all has to be the nvdia filter meta, which has already caused major issues in a lot of games. Like in Rust, where you could see in the pitch black darkness by simply enabling nvdia filters. And it has recently turned out that CS2 has been no exception, with nvdia filters allowing you to see completely through the smoke, while also making you immune to flashbangs. Now another meta in Counter-Strike 2 is the AUG and SG meta. Not because they're easier to spray with and have a scope, but because they now make giant holes in the new CS2 smokes. And what I like to do is use this tactical window to see if anybody is peeking mid. And if they do, you can easily spray them down. Now if we try this with the M4 or the AK, you can see this doesn't work at all. But if you still refuse to use these weapons, you can still pull off some insane plays with a simple nade. Next we got the depressing CS2 bhop meta. Now as we all know, bunny hopping got ruined with the release of CS2, and although they've made it a lot better, it's still pretty horrible. But there's actually a lot of commands you can enter in the console to make bunny hopping a lot easier and better. I personally tested this out and it instantly improved my movement as well as my bhop consistency. But I don't really understand why or how this works, but just the fact that we even have to enter some random commands in the console to make bunny hopping more like it was in CSGO is honestly brain dead. Now we also have a very unexpected XM meta that has been absolutely dominating CS2.
It's one guy with a shotgun.
They have a fucking one-way, bro. No fucking shot, bro.
And I don't really understand how this suddenly became a meta, since they supposedly didn't buff or nerf any of the shotguns. But somehow in CS2, the XM managed to dominate in close range, in medium ranged, and somehow even long ranged. And if you're still not using the XM, you're doing it wrong. This weapon has a fucking $900 kill reward, so you should probably give it a try.
I'm going in hard.
You clear stage first. Like, what are you talking about?
I don't get it. We're losing to auto shotguns, guys.